Um, recordings in progress. Please consent or don't consent to that. So hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. We are getting started. My name is Natalie Veldhuis, and I'm the current chair of the Iowa Hunger Coalition. And we're here to talk a bit about, well, one, how hunger is a policy choice that we're collectively making every day. But this is the Iowa Hunger Coalition annual meeting where we normally get together and really brainstorm about what we want to see included in our 2023 legislative agenda. So I am going to make some brief remarks, and then we're going to hear about the 2022 legislative session debrief from Luke Elzinga, but really the main focus of today will be that brainstorming piece. We really want to hear from folks, hear from members about what we're seeing in our communities and how we might translate that into our legislative priorities for the coming year. So if folks wouldn't mind, for introductions, if you would just post your name, pronouns, organization, if applicable, and the part of the state that you're zooming in from, that would be greatly appreciated. I can kick that off here. Thank you, Luke. Boop, boop, boop. Where do I work? Great. Okay, we have Christina and Larry. Welcome. Welcome, Kayla. Susan M, thank you for being here. Oh, great. Hi, Sarah. Windsor Heights, Eastern Iowa. Hi, Felicia. Okay. All right, Anissa. Oh, Riverbend Food Bank. Hello. All right, we have folks from all over. Iowa City, Cedar Falls. I know we have a lot of varied opinions about Zoom and how much we do or don't like it, but I do really appreciate that we can get a lot of people in a room and try to avoid these gas prices as much as possible. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your time. And I know we're seeing some familiar faces in here, but just for those who may not have been to an IHC event before, the Iowa Hunger Coalition is a membership-based 501c4 organization that does anti-hunger advocacy in the state of Iowa. We do that by advocating for state and federal policies that address root cause issues related to hunger in Iowa. We send out action alerts and opportunities for legislative advocacy and media outreach when we're seeing either state or federal bills that are going to be really impacting SNAP in Iowa. We also offer webinars on topics like Advocacy 101 for anti-hunger issues. And we did one, I think last year, on Pay What You Can cafes. We will have some additional webinars coming up this year. And we also want to hear feedback from our members and folks, really at any time about if there are webinar topics that would be helpful, or if we can showcase what different food pantries, food rescue organizations, and other local foods groups are doing across the state. And finally, we work hard to build connections with food pantries, food banks, food rescue organizations, and Iowans experiencing hunger to ensure that our policy advocacy reflects the priorities and visions, experiences of communities facing and addressing hunger in Iowa. And next slide, please, Luke. So I am not up on this. I am still learning this very much, but one of our goals, an aspirational goal that we're really working towards, is really making sure that we are thinking about and centering on our work as really a food systems perspective. So considering all different facets of the food system in our advocacy. If I'm being honest, we really focus a lot on the consumption side and protecting SNAP, just because that's, we've had to do a lot of defensive work on that recently, but we really don't want to lose sight of the other sectors of the food system, thinking about how food is made, how food systems workers are paid, and so on. So if you, feel comfortable and are interested in thinking about food systems perspective and want to help us dive a bit deeper into that I will share some opportunities for folks to get more involved in different pieces of IHC work later on. I just have a couple more things to say before I'm going to pass this on to Luke. So I just wanted to touch briefly on the impact of the end of SNAP emergency allotments. Many of us know, and as you can see in this graph that we'll look at and explain a little bit more in a moment, there has been a huge blow to SNAP benefits in Iowa, starting in April 2022, when the public health emergency declaration was lifted and effectively ended emergency allotments for SNAP in Iowa. And just as a reminder, emergency allotments kicked in around March of 2020 when the pandemic hit, and it meant that all households received the maximum benefits they possibly could for their household size. And so one example for like an individual of what this meant is that, you know, before the pandemic, maybe a single individual was receiving $16 a month in SNAP. Then during emergency allotments, they could be receiving up to $250 per month in SNAP, but then now that those have curtailed, it's back down to about $20 per month. So that's at least a $200 hit to those benefits per month. And it's a huge change. And we're really feeling the effects of this change in food pantries across the state. Some pantries are reporting at least a 50% increase in pantry visits compared to 2021 because of this change. And many are seeing both an influx of returning clients who didn't need pantry assistance for a couple years due to emergency allotments, as well as many new clients. And we're still, you know, thinking through why that might be. You know, a lot of it could be food and gas prices right now. But I just wanted to name that and touch on that because that is something that we are really seeing and kind of all collectively struggling through at this moment. But anyway, that's enough of me talking. That's not the point of why we're here. So we're hoping to pivot a bit. This year for our annual meeting, we would really love to focus on hearing from members and those in the room about what you're seeing in your communities and really using that as a backdrop for our discussion of potential legislative priorities for the 2023 session. So if you wouldn't mind either typing in the chat or unmuting yourself to share, we would love to hear from you. You know, what's one thing that you're proud of that your group or community did this past year to fight hunger or food insecurity? Because we know that there's really cool work happening all over the state. And, you know, there's a lot going on in the world, and not to take this into a toxic positivity place, but we just want to highlight and get a sense of what groups and organizations have been doing to address what we're seeing in our communities. So trying to think if I have one. I kind of do stuffy policy stuff. Let's see. Luke, do you have one you want to toss in there?
Yeah, I can share. And again, feel free to either raise your hand or just unmute yourself or just put something in the chat. This wasn't exactly totally this past year. It's something that we started near the start of the pandemic, but I work for the DMARC Food Pantry Network in Des Moines. One thing I'm really proud of that we've done is starting a delivery program. So this was something early on in the pandemic where a lot of people maybe couldn't leave their homes for medical or transportation reasons. But we started a no contact delivery service where people could call in, place a food pantry order, and then that would be delivered the next day. And I'm really happy that this is something that we're going to be continuing indefinitely into the future. We're actually expanding the program this month. We're partnering with DoorDash to actually now people will not have to wait until the next day to receive that food order. We'll be able to do a delivery that same day. And so that's one thing that I'm kind of proud of that my organization has done in the past year. So I'm seeing some things coming through in the chat too.
Yeah. Thank you, Luke. If anyone is feeling really extroverted or outgoing and want to want to unmute and share something, otherwise, please just continue popping things into the chat. I know. Thank you, Senator Sarah Trungariat, for joining us this morning. She also works at the DMARC, Food Pantry Network, and she said we moved into our new headquarters, expanding our capacity to serve the community. That's awesome. Let's see, we have Aubrey with Eat Greater Des Moines. They launched their food rescue app at the end of May. At the end of May, it's going really well. Had almost 400 people sign up to be a volunteer for food rescue delivery drivers in the first month. Wow, it's going to help us scale up food rescue in our community. Great. Okay. Ooh, we have the food rescue partnership out of the Quad Cities. Ooh, pizza buffet. How do I get in on that? Oh, okay. Started donating food. Love that. EPA Food Recovery Challenge recognition, discussion to shift messaging to food recovery and compost at the home in fiscal year 23. Awesome. Let's see. Sarah shared that community has been successfully growing our mobile pantry and food delivery programs. Excellent. Andrea Cook, Johnston Partnership, Food Pantry and Clothing Closet has seen, 60 to 80% increase in services over the last 3 months compared to the same months in 2021. We're hearing that a lot. Let's see, kept our shelves fully stocked, racks full of basic clothing items, have been able to increase allotments of diapers, wipes, protein, and produce. Amazing. Those are like the big buck, big ticket pantry items. So that's awesome. Not sure how long we can sustain this. It would be nice if we had more policy supports or if things were less expensive, but we're just going to do our best. Okay, we have Kayla Rome from the North Liberty Community Pantry, expanded staff to help meet needs, and an AmeriCorps member. Awesome, expanded delivery services. See, among all the crappy things that are happening, good things are also happening. Let's see here. We have Susan Aaron with SILT, long-term impact, but SILT won more than, $570,000. Oh, from Dubuque County ARPA funds to circle Dubuque with permanent sustainable food farms over the next 4 years, affordable land for food farmers. Whoa. Yeah, that amount of money is like, in terms of my organization, is like, that sounds like $1 bajillion. Okay, and Aubrey shared almost 30 community refrigerators have been launched in our region. Yeah, exciting to see more and more groups hosting a fridge to expand access to food. Amazing. Okay, and then we have Coralville Community Food Pantry in partnership with the Coralville Library launched community fridge about 2 months ago. It's well received within the community. Amazing. All right, we have Ilsa speaking about the Johnson County Food Policy Council, advocated to invest $25,000 in ARPA funding to community supported agriculture, locally grown vegetables and protein shares to be distributed in the community. Awesome. Council is developing recommendation for broader grant program to support local farmers and food businesses in response to COVID. Wow. Yeah. So really cool stuff going on. Yay, community fridges. Thank you so much for sharing. This is so much cooler than me just talking with slides and graphs. So yeah, excellent things going on. Thank you all for the work that you're doing in your communities.
Natalie, can I mention something about child nutrition programs?
Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Meg. I work for Area Education Agency. I just want to mention that the last couple of years in Iowa and across the nation, children have been able to receive a meal, breakfast and lunch, through the school breakfast program and national school lunch program free of charge, which has resulted in a 45% increase in breakfast participation in the state of Iowa and a 7% increase in lunch participation in the state of Iowa as well. So it's been a pretty awesome, pretty interesting last couple of years, very busy, but we're definitely reaching a lot more kids. But that funding did end June 30th. So we are looking at opportunities to continue with it. And then just recently, the Keep Kids Fed Act came out. on June 24th, and President Biden signed it on June 25th. And that did increase our reimbursement rates by 40 cents per meal for lunch and 15 cents per meal for breakfast. So that's going to help to take some pressure off this upcoming school year. So thank you for the
Excellent.
opportunity to chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Yeah, I was really nervous. I was like, oh, here's this Keep Kids Fed Act. Like, let's, they really kind of, I won't say procrastinated, but it was kind of down to the wire whether they were going to extend some of those child nutrition measures. So, I'm glad that, on some level, people are agreeing that kids should have food, because seems like a pretty agreeable stance to me. So thank you all. Ooh, reading more stuff. Let's see, not in the past year. Adam said we're hosting an event the week. Oh, right. Input for the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health, featuring Luke and Aubrey with a link. Excellent. Thank you. Oh, great. And we have Nikki with Table to Table, expanded our gleaning and farm partnerships to recover 16 times the amount of fresh produce in our community. Whoa, that's awesome. This has allowed us to partner with programs to offer free produce stands throughout the county, have engaged in partnership to make more protein available to our partners, hopefully thousands of pounds per month. Whew. Wow, that's awesome. That's like food pantry gold. So thank you. Oh, wow. Okay. I'm feeling like really energized right now. Thank you for hanging in with me. I'm still working on my reading aloud skills, but this is great. Great practice. So yeah, feel free if something pops up in your mind, just continue to throw good things that are happening into the chat. But I thought that this was a nice way to kind of get our brain juices flowing and recognizing what we're doing, but then also seeing some of those similarities and things that we're excited about that are happening in other parts of the state. So we're gonna pivot a little bit now, and we're gonna hear from Luke Elzinga with a 2022 legislative session debrief. And I'm happy to report that things weren't as bad as we thought they were going to be. So Luke, please, please expand on that.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. As Natalie mentioned earlier, a lot of our work in recent years has been kind of playing defense on the SNAP program. And unfortunately, that was what we were working on this past year as well. So the past few years, we had seen bills coming from the Iowa Senate that were really, focused on restricting access to SNAP and other public assistance programs. And they were really coming from one senator in particular, but we just saw that year after year after year. The Senate did pass a bill in 2021 that would restrict some pieces of SNAP. And Sarah's comment, it was not Senator Trungariat. But in prior years, those measures had always stopped in the Iowa House, in the House Human Resources Committee. So one thing that was really concerning at the start of the legislative session this past year in January was we saw 7 different bills introduced by the chair of House Human Resources. And really those 7 bills were the one bill that passed the Senate from the previous year broken out into a bunch of different pieces. Technically, there were 8 bills. One of them didn't deal directly with SNAP. So we were really focused on the 7 bills that did target SNAP. Some of those were a little less troubling, just talking about ways for people to confirm their identity and more frequent verification checks, which would, we believe, remove people from the SNAP program. So not good things, but there were a couple pieces that were really troubling. I think probably the most harmful proposal was to establish an asset limit for SNAP. So this would have a household limit of $2,500 in assets, a little bit higher amount if at least one member of the household was elderly or disabled. And there was a provision to exclude the amount of one vehicle from that. But if people had a second vehicle, there were certain tests there. So, you know, we were worried about that. We also heard some kind of rhetoric from the governor and Senate leaders about welfare reform, and the governor calling our safety net programs a hammock, and the Senate Majority Leader talking about how, you know, people are choosing to live in poverty. And so we were really worried that this was going to be the year that they kind of rammed through these welfare reform measures. But thanks to all of you, we really ramped up our advocacy efforts. We put together a toolkit for people to be able to, you know, reach out, have that information readily available, different graphics and handouts. We also were very intentional about gathering stories from people who would be directly impacted from these changes. So I want to do a special shout out to Tara Kramer from Des Moines, Cecilia Prophet from Iowa City, and a bunch of other people who did not feel comfortable sharing their names, but did share their stories with us. And we passed those along to legislators. We made connections with the media to help tell the story of how this was going to impact families. And we stopped it. So there was the asset test was removed. The bill was really pared back. There were still some things we weren't super happy about. And we kind of expected them to pass this kind of modified bill, which I think would have been a win anyway. They kind of ran out of time and didn't get around to it. So an even bigger win for us, I guess. So I just really want to thank all of you for reaching out to your elected officials and helping us protect SNAP. I was feeling a bit pessimistic at the start of the session, and you all helped restore some hope for this work. So thank you all for your work. Our second priority was getting funding from the state for the Double Up Food Bucks program. We worked with the Iowa Healthiest State Initiative and some other coalition partners. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Double Up Food Bucks program, it's basically a way to incentivize the purchase of fresh fruits and vegetables by SNAP participants. So the Double Up Food Bucks program kind of really expanded during the pandemic. They got some funds, some federal funds directed by the governor, but then those were going away. We were looking to fill that gap with asking for a $1 million appropriation, which we felt was very reasonable considering the state's surplus. We met with legislators, we hosted informational webinars, lobbied them. Ultimately, we were not able to find a Republican sponsor for the Double Up Food Bucks bill. And that's really critical, having someone from the majority party sponsor it. You know, Iowa is currently a Republican trifecta, so we knew that anything that was being kind of spearheaded by the Democrats likely would not go anywhere. So we are still looking for a Republican champion to take this on. So if you know your legislator in your local area who might be, you know, have an interest in this, please let us know, because that's something I think we're going to be continuing working on. So unfortunately, we did not, you know, get that funding for the Double Up Food Bucks program. So that was kind of our legislative session. I think we can be happy about the fact that we successfully fought back against some of those restrictive measures for SNAP. And we know that a lot of this is going to be, you know, a long-term advocacy fight. So is there any questions about either the SNAP bills we saw or double up food bucks? All right. Well, thank you all. And now we are going to get into kind of the meat of our meeting, brainstorming our 2023 state legislative agenda. And we want it to be, have something that's very interactive for everyone. So we are going to be using Jamboards. So I'm going to kind of give a brief tutorial on that before we get started. 1 second. So I will drop this link in the chat in just a moment, but we're using Google Jamboards for this. And we're going to kind of first do a large group discussion, just focusing on what's been the biggest challenge or barrier in the fight against hunger for you this past year. And then we're going to break into some small groups based on some of those sectors of the food system that we talked about earlier and brainstorm some policy ideas. But if you haven't used Jamboards before, it's a Google product. Really, we'll just be focusing on using these sticky notes. So if you can see on the left side of my screen here, there's a little menu. If you just hit sticky note, it'll come up. You can change the color if you want, but just type out your message here and then hit save. And the sticky note will be added. It'll keep this menu up. So if you just want to do one, you can then hit cancel. You can move your sticky note, resize it. The text will automatically resize if you have something longer. So I will be here. Feel free to ask questions. Let me put this link in the chat real quick. And to start off, we are going to kind of just have a large group discussion and post a sticky note, or, you know, if you have multiple ones, that's fine too. But in order to kind of set the groundwork for some of our policy brainstorming that we're going to get into with small groups, we just wanted to start first with having everyone kind of answer the question, what has been the biggest challenge for you, your organization, your community in the fight against hunger in the last year? We're going to take about 5 minutes to all just work independently on that Jamboard. If we're starting to run out of room on that first slide, there is a second slide that's the same question. So feel free to post yours there. But we'll work for 5 minutes independently, and then we'll regroup with the whole group and see if anyone wants to share theirs. So is clear as mud. Does anyone have questions about using that? Was everyone able to access the Jamboard?
I was just gonna throw in, I'm new to Jamboard and I'm trying my best, but if anyone is like, this is above my pay grade, if you want to just toss things you would want to put on a sticky note, like in the chat, I would be happy to transfer them from the chat into the Jamboard thingy. Right. Okay. Yes. If you are on your phone, yeah, internet outage. I think we all have varying, you know, I don't have as much trust in my ability to access internet, but yeah, so if for any reason it's easier for you to toss things in the chat, I'm happy to bring them over into the Jamboard universe. I didn't know what that was until last week, so said, Luke, will you?
Yeah, no, thank you for doing that, Natalie. That's a great point. All right, so we'll take about 5 minutes and work independently, and then we will come back for a large group discussion at 10:37-ish.
This is kind of cool. Thanks, Luke.
Does look like we're already filling up some of this first slide. So at the very top of that, you can hit next frame at the top of the Jamboard, and that will bring you to a page that has the same question at the top. So
And I think the next frame thing just looks like a button with a little.
yep, it's just an arrow. If you are still looking at the Zoom and my screen, it's right here at the top. I'll kind of highlight it. There's a sticky note party happening on slide 2, it looks like. All right, well, it does look like we're kind of slowing down. I'll give it a minute more. All right, well, it looks like there's still a couple more coming in, but continue to post there. I do want us to kind of now regroup. We have a lot on here, and wondered if anyone wanted to share, again, either in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. Share something that you put down, or maybe that you noticed looking at all of everyone's responses. But yeah, let's just open it up for discussion and see if anyone wants to share specifically what they shared or something they noticed from the larger group.
Luke, I saw in the chat we had a question. Is there a way to like ditto on things on the Jamboard so we're not saying the same? Can you like,
That's a good question. There is this
Is-
shapes tool that you could like put a little shape next to it, or maybe just use a sticky note. I probably should have had that set up so we had like some little stars or something ready to go that people could just move over.
yeah,
There
what is the
is,
shape? Is that like the thing that says circle?
yep, yeah,
Mm, cool.
One thing you could do is just put, if you can edit the sticky note, just put a little +1 at the end of it. And then if it's multiple, and then you can just keep increasing the number. I've done that before.
Yeah,
good suggestion, Ilsa. Thank you.
the intel we need. I like the big dollar sign. Awesome.
Yeah, does anyone feel comfortable speaking?
I'd be happy to elaborate on my sticky note. So with that document that I shared in the chat, I was just taking a look at that this morning. I was previously referencing last year's landscape of federal nutrition programs, but this one's nice and updated. It just came out last month. So what I feel needs to take place is just better alignment of what is offered through our federal nutrition programs. When you think about the food offerings that are available through the Women, Infants, and Children program versus the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program versus child nutrition programs, and also the education piece that complements those programs. So with what I know best is child nutrition programs, and our requirements are to align with the 2020-2025 dietary guidelines for Americans. And if you guys are familiar with child nutrition programs, they're super regulated. And we have to meet whole grain rich requirements. So for next year, we have an 80% whole grain rich requirement that will be in place as long as we can access those whole grain rich products. Also, we have vegetable subgroup categories: red, orange vegetable, dark green, beans, peas, lentils, legumes. We have calories that align with, that are age appropriate for the students being served. And we also have limits on no trans fat. We have a limit on saturated fat and sodium. And they're continuing to fine tune those requirements. And what I find to be a challenge is that it seems that the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program does not meet that same standard. And it makes it tough when we're providing those healthy, nutritious meals. It makes it tough to be delivering the same message from one federal nutrition program to another, when with the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, there are those accessory foods, and there is a reference, it's called the accessory food list. And I'd be happy to share it in the chat as well. But it makes it very difficult to be sending the same message to the individuals, the recipients of these foods, when there's that lack of alignment. What I feel might be a benefit is if the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program aligns closer to the Women, Infants, and Children program with the types of foods that are being offered. I appreciate and welcome any input on that as well, because you guys know more than I do about the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So I definitely would appreciate hearing your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Megan. Does anyone else want to either respond to Megan's comment or share one of their own? I see people are moving things around and maybe kind of grouping them and kind of some shared themes or topics.
Yeah, I'll mention in the 2 slides we have, there's a lot of talk about SNAP, definitely, and there's a lot of talk about its impact, but then also the stereotypes and the policy decisions. And I thought somebody had a really good comment on there about not calling it food stamps and having to qualify who should get it and put people into buckets and kind of continue to stigmatize it. So it does seem like we're really all experiencing a lot of the same things with that SNAP decrease and kind of how that's impacting all of these other things that are going on. I noticed there's also a capacity trend, both in terms of space and hands. And that's something that I think the larger and smaller food pantries and food banks have been experiencing a lot of. So it's just interesting that these food sectors and nonprofit sectors are experiencing the same, shorthandedness that our corporations are experiencing as well, but doesn't seem to be getting the same policy advantages that a lot of corporations seem to be getting in terms of, trying to increase our staffing shortages.
Yeah, thanks for pointing those out, Kayla. Anyone else? I'm a fan of awkward silences, making people feel like they need to share, so.
That's what my therapist does.
Luckily, I've had enough therapy that I'm starting to get better, but not that good, apparently. So, I did have I know some of the things on here just about some of the challenges of working in the space with funders and, that those who have a lot of money and resources don't generally want to lose all the money and the resources by suggesting policy change that could either disrupt their power in the space or disrupt the money that they're receiving. And so there's definitely, I think too, the pandemic showed how there's kind of only a couple solutions that the government likes to put in when there's an issue and don't have a very good understanding of the broad scope of different organizations and partners that work in this space that could benefit from additional resources. So I think the local food purchase agreement, LFPA and LFS programs that are going to be happening this year could be a really good opportunity to see what happens when you support local farmers and try to expand beyond the traditional networks, but that we'll see what happens this year.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Aubrey. That was one thing I noticed kind of coming up in the sticky notes is what you talked about, community not leading decision making, kind of funders being resistant to some of those more systems level changes. So I agree.
Yeah, and I think that ties in too some of the things that are like supply chain related, especially, which is like if we have all of these logistical challenges that get amplified by climate change, that get amplified by COVID, that local piece, I feel like that's like a part of the conversation that we're, I think, starting to incorporate better is like, how does supporting local community-based food systems do the work of providing more access and autonomy to the people who are experiencing food insecurity? Because the global supply chain is definitely going to be part of the way that we eat and the way that we try to get more access for our communities, but the local food system can also provide a lot of resiliency, and we need to be investing in that.
Thank you, Giselle. Is there anyone else who wants to share?
Aubrey, I know you're on this call, and I'm asking this a little bit because of like ignorance and still trying to better understand it myself. But I think when it comes to like a lot of the funding or solutions that came to try to combat hunger or try to like make food more accessible for people during the pandemic, like the food box program was one of those solutions. I think we talk a lot about like SNAP and double up food bucks as policy solutions, but then there was this influx of like post-COVID wave funding that we're still seeing coming in and new creative solutions. But I think like that was one that I'm curious about as we're talking about barriers or things that did work. And maybe this is on the agenda already and I'm jumping the gun. Sorry, I'm hopping in late. But with the food box program, I'm curious, like, if that's already on here or if that's something new.
Well, Giselle, I know you asked for Aubrey's opinion. I think for Aubrey's opinion, the table, I have thoughts about that. And it was kind of along the lines of what I was thinking is that the solutions we're coming up with are based on existing infrastructure that's not working. Like, there's a lot about it that isn't working. And the food boxes, in my opinion, were very, I mean, no way to take full advantage of all of that food. And the folks, you know, in our communities who could have really used it, you know, weren't able to benefit as much because we couldn't take advantage of the way in which it was distributed. And I actually think money funding, like, you know, a lot of the things that challenged with as if like fully top down like mechanisms are going to work, and they're not, because that's not really who's on the front lines and doing the work.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Aubrey.
I was gonna say, I 100% agree with Nikki. And part of, I think what the food boxes showed us was, you know, what happens when you just try to shove a bunch of food into a space, and then recognizing the lack of infrastructure. And cold storage was a huge issue. You know, I think like what Nikki, we were only able to participate through luck of having the right people and partners there that could do it. But like Nikki said, those boxes were not remotely equitably distributed and available to everybody who needed them. And so I think to that point of continuing to try to do, like, just throw more money and throw more food into the same spots and expecting that it's going to end up somewhere different is not smart. So, you know, really looking at how can we not necessarily completely de-invest in certain areas, but also recognize where could more investments be made in new and non-traditional spots that not only help within the food access space, but also filling those critical gaps within the local food infrastructure space. Because I think a lot of it's been looked at as an either or, whereas it's still food. And it still needs to move, and it still needs to be moved safely. So how can we start to put some of these potential things together instead of always looking at them as like they have to be completely separate and not talked about at the same time?
Yeah, thank you, Nikki and Giselle and Aubrey, for bringing up some really great points that I think we can get into in our small group discussion. Is thinking outside the box, thinking in innovative ways that aren't, you know, just the way that we kind of always address this issue. I really hope in this brainstorming session that's coming up that we can really kind of delve deeper into that, get some good discussions going. Before we do that, is there anything else anyone wanted to share kind of from this large group discussion, slides? One kind of common thread that stood out to me was this idea of needing to kind of change the narrative or how hunger and food insecurity is being talked about. Issues of stigma, of our legislators being misinformed or having stereotypes about people who experience food insecurity and why. You know, lawmakers who don't think hunger is a priority, just all these myths and misinformation that is out there. I hope this is something that comes up in our small group discussions, but I'm also not sure if there is a necessarily like policy tied to that. I think this goes back to how we as organizations, you know, talk about the issue of food insecurity and help kind of try to change that narrative. But that is one that stuck out to me. Are there any others that anyone feels like we've missed that kind of were brought up here that you want to address before we move forward.
I'm curious to know if there have been practices that have been implemented throughout the last couple of years that should continue. Things that have increased efficiencies, have been able to reach more people, streamlining of programs or programs complementing each other. I'm just interested to know, like with the electronic benefits transfer card, if that helped to improve processes and reaching more people, just things that we can look at that we should continue to fight for moving forward.
One thing on our end that, wasn't even up to us was just the speed through which the ARPA funds were passed down to individual municipalities, and how every municipality got to set their own standard for how to apply for that and how to get those funds. Most of that grant making process can be so complicated and challenging. You have these smaller organizations that aren't willing or able to do that kind of grant work, but really just with each city making their own decisions for what's best for each city. I thought that was just something I never thought I would see, and that seemed to be pretty quickly implemented as well.
Something I saw that was great was when those SNAP benefits, when people had money, when it was, max benefits were out there and there was aid, and that shows what happens when people have the resources to be able to buy what they want and live, and have a house. Like, if you can increase the money that people have in their pockets, then it decreases the strain on all of these other services that are back into being overwhelmed right now. So, that's probably one of the biggest things I saw, was that when investment was made in individuals actually having the money to buy their own groceries, they did that. And that's what I think sometimes there's a huge disconnect, is this, people, especially they want to live in poverty. No, when people were kind of given a little bit extra money to get out of poverty, they did all the things that we've always said that we want them to do. So why not just try to, let's just give people money again. That'd be great.
Yeah, Aubrey, I agree. And I feel like on the flip side, from the policymaker standpoint, it just showed me that when they feel like it, we can have a child tax credit. We can boost these benefits. We can have pandemic unemployment. We can, we can stop student loan payments and evictions and all these things. And it just shows like, oh, we can have nice things, or we can support people really substantially in a policy way. But then it all kind of also went away, like with the child tax credit and stuff. So it's like, oh, okay, we can do this kind of whenever, but we're just not, policymakers aren't choosing to. Lovely.
Any final thoughts from anyone, or we can move on to small group discussion? All right. Thank you all for participating. We had way more Post-it notes than I expected, some great discussion, so I really appreciate that. We are going to move on to some small group policy brainstorming now. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to have 4 different breakout rooms that you can choose from. And this is kind of going back to our community food systems framework we introduced at the start of the session. But there's going to be a breakout room focused on production. So policy ideas for, growing more food in our state and getting food to people who need it, processing and distribution, access and consumption. I feel like this is the area we have kind of really been focusing on in terms of SNAP access. But let's be, like people said, like thinking more outside the box on what's possible. And then the last breakout room is food waste and recovery. And I really liked what someone mentioned earlier around, climate change and how this connects with that, issues of composting. I'm sure you're all aware that You know, we have a lot of food that is going to landfills that does not need to be, that could be supporting people. But also it's a huge source of methane emissions. So thinking about policies to limit food waste and recover some of that good food for people who could use it. So the question we're kind of asking, posing to all our small groups is, what are the top policy priorities that the Iowa Hunger Coalition should be pursuing in this area? So each of those kind of areas. We're going to break out into the small groups, and we're going to have 20 minutes for conversation. Going back to the Jamboard, if you click here at the top to go to the next frame, there is a Jamboard for each of these small groups. So however you want to do it, if you guys just want to have a conversation and then have one person for your group kind of taking notes on the Jamboard, if you want to do that collaboratively and all like just do 5 minutes on your own and posting those and then discussing them, however your group wants to do that, we will ask for people to kind of share out at the end. But are there any questions there before we break out into those small groups? We'll plan on giving you 20 minutes. Maybe we'll check in. If that doesn't feel like quite enough time, we can extend it a little bit. But otherwise, I'm going to get those small groups together. You can choose which one you want to join. Feel free to message myself or Natalie if you have any questions or run into any kind of technical issues. But 1 second, I will create these breakout rooms.
Luke, I also just wanted to ask, let's see. So I think that beforehand we figured out we're hoping to have at least one like facilitator type person in each of the groups. And really that like their role is just to kind of keep the conversation rolling. And I think that we have one planted for most of the groups, but the one where one of our IHC board members wasn't able to make it is production. So I don't know if there's someone who's interested in the food production side of things who has just had coffee and is feeling really lively this morning. But if anyone wants to step up in that area and kind of help facilitate that discussion, that would be helpful, but also, you know, I mean, it could just be a really fun free-for-all. So thank you, Luke, for setting
right.
it up.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. I forgot to mention that. So yes, if we want to have kind of a self-declared facilitator for the production group, that would be great if someone wants to volunteer. We're going to open these up. They've each got each breakout group has the name of it, and it kind of corresponds with the slide. So just make sure you find, when you go back to the Jamboard, the slide that your group is on to start adding those notes. We're going to open those breakup rooms now, and we will see you all back here with the full group in about 20 minutes around 11:20.
Luke, how do you get to the breakout room? Oh,
I just opened them up, so you should be able to choose one to join. And I'm going to stay here until people have joined, just to make sure everyone's got it figured out and needs to go where they need to. And if you're having any trouble, I can also assign you to a room if you're having trouble joining. All right. So now we are going to report back each group. I'm going to share my screen and bring up the Jamboard. So I noticed this too, but we only had 2 people joining the production group. Did you talk about anything, or did you just go to another group? And that's fine.
We just switched. We chatted a bit about the same topics that we had discussed in the processing and distribution on the butchery block bill and the certification for meat processing.
All right, well, maybe we will just go on then to processing and distribution, unless there's any policy ideas that anyone wants to like throw out right now for production. Okay, well, feel free to post those in the chat if you think of any, but we will move along. I do think some of these post-its were supposed to be on another one. So no, you're fine. I just saw them coming up. I was like, this isn't our group.
I'm working on it. I'm taking them off. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. So I'm just going to talk about the ones that we discussed. And please, anyone else from the group, like, feel free to hop in at any time. But we really talked about state investment in local food infrastructure. So the fact that there's not anyone doing vegetable processing for local foods in the state. And like Megan mentioned, just like how we saw the butchery bill and like the artisan butcher program and the funding for those startups this past legislative session, and wondered if there could be some sort of similar investment for local food infrastructure, kind of based on the Meat Locker initiatives and renewable energy infrastructure funding. Another thing that came up was the LFPA and LFS funding opportunities and educating our legislators on those, and also allocating consistent funding to those programs. And then also talked about the opportunity for the Iowa Hunger Coalition to partner with the Iowa Farmers Union on local food, healthy kids initiative with lobbying and advocacy there. So we had some great experts in that group around processing and distribution. I am not one of them. So please, anyone from the group, if there's anything you'd like to kind of like expand on or specifically bring up, because this is not my area of expertise. Okay, well, we'll move on. Apparently I did a good enough job. So will someone from the access and consumption group report out on that?
I'm happy to do that unless someone else really wants to. We were all over the place. We came up with so many ideas. But we talked about thinking about places like food pantries as being like a shared space, a community resource, a community hub, and not just like a program. And really doing some culture change internally within our organizations that really, can help us change policy. And I'm butchering some of this, but yeah, changing culture around rescued foods and thinking more broadly about what a hunger issue is, like thinking about transportation as a hunger issue, and all of these other pieces. And I'm trying to, if anyone else wants to chime in and add some other things that I'm missing. I know we talked a little bit about how, a lot of times we're doing defensive work on SNAP, but like, what do we really want to see? And the difference between, are we meddling with what's just going on in the legislature, or to what extent are we working within communities and then uplifting what they're wanting to see and making sure that that is something that is being spoken about at the legislature? So if anyone else wants to hop in and and fill in some of the holes, but those were some of the things that I had jotted down.
I actually have a question. I've seen this coming up a lot lately about this idea of not elevating community ideas to the legislator. Could you give me specific examples of ideas that are coming up that we as food banks and, the paid people, right, aren't bringing up, or like what voice we're missing? I'm not sure if I'm asking it right, but you seem to be nodding, so I'm going to go with yes, you understood.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think a lot of what I hear is just kind of that broader look of what hunger is and what it means and what it looks like. So thinking about things like how, how wages are connected to hunger, how wealth is connected to hunger, access to transportation, even, like workers' rights, climate justice, all these different pieces. And like within our current political environment, it can be really difficult to have those kinds of conversations. But if that is something that we're hearing from the community time and time again, I just wonder if there is some kind of an avenue to at least know our lawmakers, or make sure our lawmakers know that those are important issues that are related to hunger. I don't know if I'm botching that, but like kind of that list of like things that are impossible that we can't have in Iowa.
I would add,
Yeah.
A lot of times, kind of what I've seen in the past has been a willingness to talk about wages and a willingness to talk about things that I think sometimes are looked at as like that's outside of the food space, but it's not outside of the food space. It does impact people's ability, but some of those kinds of things have been just not, no one's excited to talk about it, but that's been a piece. I think also just talking to, I know for us is just the difference between Feeding America supported organizations and those that are not supported by Feeding America, that they both play an important role. And I think that's not always well explained or understood in communities, is that there's multiple avenues to try and resolve some of this, but it's usually presented as this is the only option and this is where resources go, instead of thinking more expansively about, and I think the LFS and LFPA is a great example of how we can potentially show what happens when you, kind of expand that tent a little bit.
Yeah. And I would add on to, I think like both of those things, because the work that we're doing through the Iowa Food System Coalition is trying to get at this like grassroots-based participatory framework. And a lot of folks that are on this call are part of that work. And a lot of the folks have participated in like focus groups and listening sessions and like specifically around food access. And so some of the things that I've heard, I mean, some of it is not necessarily policy change, but it's like, how do we do the education work and the messaging work to connect the dots? So if you are from a community that is not plugged into the system and doesn't have the social supports to understand how does county processing licensing work, how do you get a warehousing license from the state, like how do you become part of the TFAP network if that's what you want to do, like some of that, like just like if you don't speak English, like those things are really challenging. If you live in poverty, those things are really challenging. So some of that is like, what are the social supports? And that gets into like, how do we pay people to help promote the work that already exists and the solutions that already exist and reduce the barriers? So some of it isn't like new ideas. It's just like, how do we let people take advantage of the ideas that already exist and the supports that do exist? And then I think it is like, us figuring out strategic messaging to like talk about that intersectional piece of like, how does poverty, how does transportation, how do all these things tie together? And how do we form the coalition with the other entities around the state that are doing that work so that it's not this siloed thing of like, well, food's over here and these other people do this thing over here. And as a policymaker, you have to decide like where to give funding instead of like thinking about like the ways they tie together. But yeah, like I think the other piece is like that big, bold vision piece of like deciding when we advocate for what we really want and what we really think is needed versus what we think is possible. So within like the TFAP network, that was something that came up a lot of like food pantries and food access folks like not wanting to collect that kind of information from people who are visiting their pantries, like invasive questions about whether or not people deserve access to food or whether they qualify. And so I think like that feels like a very consistent feedback from the community that are doing the work, that are in the trenches, that are on the ground, is like, can we just trust people when they say they need access to food? Yeah, those are some like concrete examples that I've heard.
So you're not talking actually about people experiencing hunger. You're talking about people that are doing the work when you're saying community-driven responses.
Yeah, and I think both. I think like some of the stuff from the pantries comes from the participants themselves, in terms of like, we don't feel comfortable, or I feel shame visiting the pantry because I have to give all of this information about myself and it's exhausting. You know, like it's not just the pantry organizers that are saying this like in a vacuum. Like I think it's coming from the
Right.
people who are experiencing it too.
Well, and there's a lot of groups where that's not distinguishable. The folks doing the work are the folks, you know, accessing the food. They're not, that's kind of the point about it not, you know, community driven feedback not making its way to the legislature. Those groups are sometimes the same, like, and they should be more the same, in order to get that word, you know, back to the legislature.
I just have to express that the barrier is the same for child nutrition programs. I mean, you have to qualify for free meals, reduced price meals. Same story.
And again, to Natalie's point, is like we saw free school meal vouchers like go out during the pandemic, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is possible. Like we know what this feels like now. And then you get to see what it feels like when it goes away. And rural districts like Clear Creek, Amana can't do free school meals anymore. And the pantries around them saw a decrease in visitation during free school meals because people were able to access them through their schools with no questions asked. So it's like all this data that we like can't concretely say what happened, but I think we like have stories about like what was telling us how big of a difference this made in people's lives to be able to access food.
Well, and we're, like so many people have mentioned, we're absolutely seeing that at food banks and pantries and community organizations now, where all these programs are ending. There's just a huge influx of people returning to the pantries, new people. And it feels like a very strong correlation, if not causation. All right, well, I'm trying to keep us on time. So unless anyone has anything else on access and consumption, maybe we can move on to food waste and recovery.
Hey, Luke, this is Dan. I got elected to report out for that group. Okay, we had a lot of great ideas, and pretty much it's broken down into these different ideas. Incentives and policies encouraging composting operations and anaerobic digestion facilities, including tax incentives, higher tipping fees at landfills, more grants to cities for composting and anaerobic operations, change the regulations on composting rules, tax incentives, incentives on the use of final compost, and require business to organic waste tracking and reporting. Where do you want me to put these ideas, Luke?
Well, I think we've got those on the Jamboard. So that's the nice thing too about Jamboard, is it provides us all these notes for after the meeting. Is there anything else anyone wanted to share on food waste and recovery. Otherwise, Natalie can kind of talk about next steps of how we're going to take this input and craft our legislative agenda.
Yes, I do have just a couple quick notes about how you can keep in touch with the Iowa Hunger Coalition, what we're going to be doing with this information, and what those next steps are. So if you haven't already, you can join our email list, like us on Facebook if you're a Facebook person. We also have a few different committees if you're like bored or have a lot of extra time or you're really pumped up. We have a policy committee, an outreach and membership committee, and a communications committee. And so we have folks from the board on there, but like all members and folks who aren't members are also welcome to be a part of those committees. And if you aren't already, please consider becoming a member. We have both individual and organizational level memberships. We really don't want finances to be a barrier for anyone who wants to participate. We do have a suggested contribution amount, and Dan, plug your ears, but like it could be like $5 annually or like $1 if, yeah, no cover charge to talk about hunger. That's not what we're about. But, you know, our membership dues help us pay for our contract lobbyist who is at the Capitol every day during the legislative session and getting, you know, our ideas and talking points in the hands of legislators. So that's a big, I would say, value add for IHC. And wanted to plug that we have a couple upcoming webinars. One will be a series called the ABCs of SNAP, where we're going to dive into some of the more weedy technical aspects of SNAP and like acronyms that seem scary, but you know, aren't once you dive into them, like ABODs and broad-based categorical eligibility and all those things that are important in these SNAP bills that we're seeing, so that we can really hone in and sharpen our advocacy and know all those little sneaky words. And so finally, we just ask that you guys watch out for your in your email inbox. We are going to send a follow-up Google form survey for you soon to vote and prioritize the legislative agenda items that we generated today, because all these ideas don't really seem like they're like in a format we could vote on right now. So we are going to you know, try to organize some of those thoughts and then get your feedback and input on, you know, how to move forward with those. And then that will become our legislative agenda for next session. And so watch out for that Google form. I also wanted to note that we usually send out a Google survey asking people their feedback on this event. Was it useful? Was it too long? Was it really boring? Like what, you know, like we like to make sure that, you know, the events that we're hosting are helpful to people, but we don't want to over survey people. So I don't have one of those for you right now, but if you feel really strongly and you want to give us feedback about this event, or, you know, if you have suggestions for how it could be better in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. We have an IHC email. You can reach out to me personally, and I'm pretty thick-skinned. I actually really like critical feedback. So please let us know if you have any cheers or jeers. Other than that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And yeah, Luke, am I forgetting anything?
No.
Woo! All right. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your time. I know there are a million webinars and there's like all kinds of things we can be doing with our time. So I really appreciate that you have been here with us this morning. I hope everyone can go eat a snack now. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Luke, you're supposed to save the chat.
Oh, thank you for the reminder. All right, see ya.